Hey gang, Craig Ripley here. Welcome once again to Living Off the Slab. Now this is going to be video number 2 in our series on riding as you get older. And in the first one we talked about the importance of staying up on your skills, becoming a lifelong learner, and making sure, again, that your skills do not deteriorate over time. In this video we're now going to talk about, well, making sure that you understand your limitations. Now, of course, this is something that should be just common sense, right? We all know that we should ride our own rides, not let our egos or our competitive natures get in the way. However, sometimes it's not so easy. So I always try, especially now as I'm getting older, to make sure that I always have something in reserve, right? I love to ride a spirited ride. Going out to ride the dragon, the tail of the dragon, like this t-shirt that I have on right now, that is a good example. Right? I've gone out and had really great spirited rides out there. But I've also made sure that I stayed within my limitations, right, and didn't go over the center line or, take a corner too hot and those kinds of things. Right? You really need to be cognizant of that as you get older, because your reaction time is going to slow down. It's just inevitable. So really understanding that and making sure that you ride within your own personal limitations, at least for me, is extremely important. Let me give you a couple examples of this that I've run across while I've been out traveling. And the first one is when I'm traveling with my wife, 2 up. Right? I've got her on the bike now, I've got all our gear on the bike, so the weight of the bike really goes up significantly. So if I go out there and I try to ride that bike in the same fashion that I do when it's just me on it, well, I'm probably going to get us in trouble, right? Because that bike is going to take longer to slow down. It's not going to handle the same, especially at low speeds. So I always try to be cognizant of this and make sure that when she's on the back of the bike, rather than waiting late to brake into a corner and maybe carrying that braking in, doing some trail braking, I always try to make sure that we do our braking ahead of time, right? So I slow down a little bit sooner and make sure that I'm completely under control, again, navigating any corner when she's on the bike. Now, another example from riding 2 up is that now that I'm getting older, at the end of a long day, I start to get tired, especially again when Kathy's on the back of the bike with me. So I start to make little mistakes, especially again coming to a stop. Right? It's harder to keep the bike smooth, again, as I get tired throughout the day. So I have learned that my days need to be a little bit shorter, right, when Kathy is with me on the bike. Right? It's a lot more work for me. Again, I get tired sooner, right? So I make sure that we keep those days nice and short, again, so everybody has a good time and we stay safe. So another example of how I've learned to better understand my limitations as I've gotten older is how far I can ride at any one shot. Now, I can still go out and do a 500 or 600 mile or even a longer day if I have to, but that is no longer my preference. I would prefer to keep my days when I'm traveling to that 200 to 300 mile range if possible. There are of course times when you need to get out on the interstate and do that 500 or 600 mile a day. However, I do it just a little bit differently than I used to. When I first started touring, I would get on the bike, fill up the tank, and I would get about 200 miles through a tank. So I would just ride for 200 miles before I stopped, filled up, maybe got a drink of water, jumped back on the bike, and repeated that, 3 or 4 times during the day. Right? And again, that was fine when I was a young whippersnapper of 50 years old, but now that doesn't work so well for me anymore. What I've been doing on my last few trips, especially when I'm traveling alone, is I don't look at how many miles I go anymore. I'm going to stop between every hour to hour and a half. And that'll depend upon the road conditions, it'll depend upon the heat that I am traveling in, and just basically how I'm feeling on the day. If I have to stop every hour, pull into a gas station or something, walk around for a few minutes, maybe do some stretching, grab something to drink, maybe even grab something to eat, that's fine, right? If I'm doing 500 miles, well, so I stop 6, 7, maybe even 8 times during the day. Who cares? I don't have any timetable to keep. What I want to do is make sure that I am comfortable, right, and staying within my limitations while I'm on this trip. Like I said, especially when I'm alone. And along those same lines, I have really changed up how closely I watch my fluid intake and even my food intake while I'm out traveling. Right? It used to be that I would just go those 200 miles between stops, and I probably wouldn't eat all day long, and I would drink very little fluid. Right? Again, none of those things are good ideas, right? And I've learned those over the years. I now know that it is extremely important for me to maintain my fluid levels, especially if I'm riding through hot conditions. Right, so I now drink continuously throughout the day. I have a hydration pack that I wear, or on my Victory Vision we had a cup that we could carry water in, and just constantly be sipping on water throughout the day. Probably about every 10 minutes or so I'm taking 2 or 3 mouthfuls of water, again to maintain those hydration levels. Again, I also make sure that I am eating enough throughout the ride as well, right? Stopping and having little snacks. Again, those extra stops help to do that, right, if you can't carry food along with you. But oftentimes I will carry power bars or some other kind of healthy snack, nuts, something like that, along with me. That way, whenever I stop, I can just grab a snack and again maintain my blood sugar levels and just maintain my energy levels as well. Again, those are all very important things, again, as we get older. Oh, and one last thing that I just thought of that I have done to compensate for my age, right, is that I've switched to lighter bikes. Right? I now ride the Yamaha Super Tenere, which, while heavy for an adventure bike, is 600 pounds or so. Right? Still, it is much, much lighter than my Victory Vision was at around 900 pounds. Right? And even for a touring bike, I have now switched to a BMW K1600 GTL, which you wouldn't think is very light at 775 pounds or so, but that's about 110, 120 pounds lighter than the Victory Vision was. So that has made a big difference, especially again at the end of a long day when I've got everything loaded down here, that I can handle the bike much better as I get tired. Right, the bike is much better balanced. You can come to a stop much more smoothly. The Victory Vision had a tendency to get light on the front end, especially when it was all loaded down. So again, at the end of a long day, you're fighting with that, and it got extremely tiring. So the BMW has made a big difference in getting that weight off and getting a bike that is much better balanced to accommodate, again, my age and my lack of endurance, again, as I'm getting older.